Welcome to Distilled Bourbon Podcast. I'm Brent. I'm here with my co-host Chuck. And unfortunately, we don't have Brian today. Brian is off on assignment. But we do have a couple of special guests today that I can't wait to tell you about. Chuck, I have been looking forward to this episode for 2 years.
I know
right?
you have.
Second episode. We go down to Hopkinsville. We go to Casey Jones.
Yep.
We have a fantastic conversation with Peg and AJ.
Yep.
We take the tour. We go to the testing table. There are 13 beautiful bottles out there. We go through several of them. And at the very end, she says, so I don't know if you've ever had this one before. Does anybody want to try Bourbon Rabbi? And in my most eloquent way, I say, what? And we try it, and it's like, what is this? This is it was love at first take. It has become the official Bridges Lyle's 612 North Main bourbon of the house. We've had multiple bottles of it from that day forward, and today we have the Bourbon Rabbi here himself, Chaim Litvin. So great to see you, my friend. Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good to be here.
You're from Louisville.
Yep.
You are a rabbi, and you make amazing bourbon.
Thank you. Yes.
So that's guest number one, and we're going to get into all the details with you. But for the fans of this show, you have heard me talk about my brother from another mother, my best friend, Kevin, for a long time. Nobody really thought you existed, but here you are in the flesh. In the turret behind her microphone. I can't believe it. Irina, I don't know how you made this possible, but you're an amazing woman. Thank you. Kevin, great to have you here, my friend.
Thank you. Honored to be here. So, yeah.
Kevin knows as much about bourbon as anybody that I know, almost as much as Chuck. We call Chuck the walking encyclopedia. Maybe we need to call Kevin the walking Costco because he has that many bottles of bourbon in his house.
Cool.
And he's tried a lot of them, and he's just an all-around fantastic guy. So it's going to be a great episode. I'm glad you're here. If you're on YouTube, hit that like button, hit the subscribe, and we'd love to hear from you. If you're listening to us on a podcast, you can find us anywhere you find podcasts, on iTunes, Spotify, anywhere else. Send us a message on Facebook, and let us know how we're doing and what you want to hear about. Now that I've had verbal diarrhea, Chuck, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited about this as well. I remember that day. I remember how you fell for Bourbon Rabbi. You bought quite a bit of it that time. Now, every time I go through Hopkinsville and Casey Jones, I'll give you a call and say, hey, do you need anything from down here? But actually, I think Brian has Bourbon Rabbi on the shelf. So we're able to buy it in our hometown.
Thank goodness.
Thank you, Brian.
Yes, Brian McDaniel at Beverage Barn. He's at 5 locations now, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
You can get it at all of those, I believe. You can't get it at the one on Barrett Boulevard today because I bought all of them. Sorry about your luck. You'll have to go to one of the other locations. But how in the world did you get into making bourbon?
That's a great question. It needs a little.
Well, we just happen to have a little Bourbon Rabbi.
Yeah, so.
Chaim?
Chaim?
Just as good as the first day I had it.
Oh, that's good. Who makes this one?
I believe it's you.
So how did I get into the bourbon industry? It's a great question with a long answer. I guess we got time, so let's get
we have time.
So my family's been doing kosher certification on all kinds of stuff, not just the liquor industry, since before I was born. A couple distilleries, Heaven Hill, for example, is a distillery that's been kosher certified. My father started the kosher organization in the early 80s. When I moved back to town after getting married, started doing the kosher supervision with my father. The distilleries were more fun than the other. I mean, I certify a popcorn facility, peanut butter, a couple industrial bakeries. But who wouldn't want to hang out at Casey Jones Distillery or Peerless or Heaven Hill?
So you heard it here first. Distillers are more fun.
Oh, distillers are more fun.
So, kind of when I was growing the kosher agency, distilleries were just, on my radar. Rabbit Hole's another one that joined the kosher family there. And then throughout all that time, just meeting all these just amazing people, distillers. I got to spend a lot of time with in Heaven Hill with the Parkers, and in Peerless with not just Corky and Carson, but with Caleb Kilburn, the master distiller there, and just the encouragement, just knowing all these people, getting all this information, and with all that encouragement, I started doing tastings, lectures, talks all over the country. In 2017, the Wall Street Journal did an article about me keeping bourbon kosher, certifying all these different distilleries. They nicknamed me the Bourbon Rabbi. Then there was even more talks, more lectures. Started doing it even internationally. Then the most common question I got during these tastings is, which one's yours? So I was always like, oh, well, I certify this one, or I help these guys write their CIP systems, and, all these different excuses, but I didn't actually have like this one's mine. COVID hits 2020. I was actually just about to go to a Canada tour. Supposed to do a whole bunch in Montreal and then over to Toronto. Obviously that got canceled, and I decided it's time to answer that question. And
there you go. You got to do something. Yours.
Right? So came out with the bourbon. We had the first product was the flagship 115 proof Kentucky Bourbon. It was initially bottled at Casey Jones Distillery. The 115 is actually an interesting number, the way we came up with that. In Judaism, there's a concept called gematria. Gematria is a numerological value of letters. So if A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, go up till 10, 20, 30, 40 till 100, then 100, 200, 300. So the word for empowering strength to others in Hebrew is chazak, is strength. We say it at the culmination of each of the 5 books of Moses when we read them in the synagogue, and that strength. And we always want to be drinking for positive things and sure. Strength. We don't want to do, be doing this for negative. On every bottle it says l'chaim responsibly. We want to be doing this for good things and good reasons. So the numerological value of the word chazak, of strength, is 115. So with 115 proof on that, and that's still available at Casey Jones Distillery down in Hopkinsville. And that's kind of the origin story there.
Fantastic. And 115 turns out to be the perfect proof for me, for my taste buds. It's just fantastic. I love it. And well, how many times have we talked about the experience, the things surrounding the actual liquid that comes out of the bottle really adds to the bourbon. And that story, you have it on your, at least a version of that on the tags on every bottle here. And you and I had a chance to sit down and had a coffee one day, and you told me that, and it's just made it that much better.
So some of the distillers you were talking about, some of them are Jewish.
Yep.
Heaven Hill, owned by the Shapiro family. Since 1935, the 5 Shapiro brothers used to own the Louisville stores, which I didn't grow up with, but my wife, there was one in the county seat where she grew up. Kentucky Peerless, before World War I, owned by Henry Craver here in Henderson, Jewish fellow. Rabbit Hole, started by an Iranian fellow.
Yep. His wife's Jewish.
Well, there you go. So is it a challenge for bourbon or for any kind of whiskey to be kosher?
So the process of making bourbon in and of itself is a kosher process. You're taking grains. Grains are always kosher. They go from the ground. Anything that goes from the ground is kosher. You're adding water. You're adding yeast. 99.9% of the time, the yeast is going to be kosher. So that process, you're mashing the grain. We can do a little distillation 101. The way bourbon is made, just in a quick under-minute, super overview, not a lot of detail, but you take a bunch of grains, mostly corn, obviously, 51% corn at least. You smash those grains, looks more like flour, mix between oatmeal and flour. You cook them, then you let it ferment 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, depending on who it is, where it is, and then you distill that. The way the distillation works, essentially, you're adding that liquid in, you're heating up your pot, water evaporates at 212, alcohol evaporates at 180, So if you're bringing it between 212 and 180, the water will fall, the alcohol will turn into gas and go up, gets condensed. You can do that again to redistill or capture that as it cools, turns back into liquid, and that's your distillate. As a distillate, it's almost always going to be kosher. The only way really that it wouldn't be kosher is if your equipment was used for something non-kosher, which most big distilleries, anybody that's doing this all the time, isn't going to really have a way of making it non-kosher. Really, the only way is if you distill milk or grape product in your still or fermented in your fermentation tanks. Other than that, which is the super large majority, the product going into the barrel, the distillate, is going to be kosher. Now, with bourbon, especially, as opposed to scotch and other whiskeys, that barrel has to be brand new. So we don't have to worry about what was in that barrel last. If that was kosher, goes into the barrel, that barrel is going to be brand new, so it's kosher. So again, you're like 99.9% all bourbon in a barrel is going to be kosher.
What if you're going to, well, you're probably going to this, but what happens if you want to do some sort of treatment? If you want to use a wine, a finish, yeah.
So once it's in the barrel, we're assuming it's kosher 99.9% of the time. Obviously, there are those scenarios, which is why if you're concerned about kosher, you want to look for a kosher certification. You'll see that on a whole bunch of bottles. Peerless has got it on it. Obviously, mine has it on it. There's a whole bunch that have that symbol on there. There's also a list of kosher bourbons at bourbonrabbi.com. And there's an extensive list of all the bourbons. It's got Wild Turkey, stuff outside of the state. There's Law's Bourbon out of Denver. Golden Moon Distillery out of Colorado also has a whole bunch of kosher products. So it's not just Kentucky stuff, but it's stuff from all over. And those are all listed on the website. But as we were saying, the product in the barrel is going to be kosher 99.9% of the time. The question is what happens after that. So there's really two options once it's in the barrel. Either you're putting it in a second barrel, which is pretty common these days, finish it in a honey barrel, rum barrel, wine barrel, port, sherry, whatever it is, rosé, or you're bottling it. So we'll go the quicker finish first is the bottling. So where is it being bottled? How is it being bottled? So if it's being done in-house, if you're taking a company like any of the big seven, right, they're bottling it themselves. So it's in their barrel. They're going to bottle it, and they're done. So there isn't, any space or time for anything to go wrong. The next scenario is if it's a smaller place, say someone's contract distilling, so it's distilled somewhere, it's aged somewhere, then those barrels are either dumped and shipped in totes, in containers, or shipped as barrels to the bottling facility. So if those totes are used before, those totes may not be kosher. If the tanker, obviously the tanker was used before, so did it have a kosherizing wash between the last use and the current use? That could make it non-kosher. When it gets to the bottling facility, what else did they bottle? What was in that tank last? What was on that bottling line last? So once it's an NDP, non-distillate producer, so what happens in that interim from barrel to bottle that could make it become non-kosher? Then when you go to the finishes, so if you age it in a rosé barrel or a Cabernet Sauvignon barrel, like I have here, we're going to taste this soon. This is aged in Cabernet Sauvignon barrels. So these barrels are actually from a kosher winery in California. If the winery is non-kosher, so that would actually make the whiskey non-kosher, and that could actually then affect the storage containers and the bottling line and all other kinds of issues can arise from that. But a straight bourbon may, place like Peerless or Casey Jones that we spoke about earlier, where they don't have a whole bunch of other flavors going on. They're making the whiskey, putting it in a bottle. Look for the kosher symbol, and you're good to go.
So how long does your kosher certification process take at a given distillery?
So that actually varies depending on where it is. If you take a distillery the size of like a Jim Beam, a Heaven Hill, a Buffalo Trace, that would be a lot longer.
Okay.
Those guys are making thousands and thousands of products. And some of them are not, most of them are not even straight whiskeys. So you've got flavored products. In Heaven Hill, you have the Burnett's vodka with 30 some odd flavors. You have brandies, you have cognacs, you have all these other kinds of things that have wine in them, which is non-kosher. And you got to make sure the separation of equipment is maintained and the kosherizing in between. Jim Beam has, their cinnamon flavors and their honey flavors, all these other flavors.
Yep.
Some flavors in some facilities like that are not natural flavors. They could be chemical flavors. They could have coloring agents in them. So all those ingredients have to be checked. And then if you flip that to a smaller facility that is just making bourbons, so there's no flavors to check, there's no recipes to check. They're just dumping barrels and putting it in bottles. So that's going to be easier and quicker to audit and check than a bigger company that's doing hundreds and hundreds of or thousands of products.
So from hours to days or even weeks?
So the kosher process in all of them, big or small, is a continuous process. It's not a check and you're done. It's audits all the time, usually unannounced. We just pop in, hey, what's up? What's going on? What's in this tank? What was in this tank? Most of these companies have records. You can see all on a computer what was where, see what it is. If there's a flavor that got changed out, maybe make sure that the new flavor is kosher as well. All those types of things are all in that kosher audit process.
And just to be clear, you made a comment about wine. Wine isn't kosher. There are kosher wines. There are non-kosher wines.
Yes, there are kosher and non-kosher wines. So, like I said, the Cabernet Sauvignon used in the Bourbon Rabbi Cabernet finish is a kosher wine. It's from a winery in Oxnard, California called Shira Winery. Wine was used for millennia to sanctify deities in all religions, maybe except in the Muslim faith, because they don't do the alcohol, at least not at a religious level. But in Christianity and in Judaism and a lot of in Hindu and a whole bunch of different religions use wine. The rabbis wanted to make sure that any wine used to sanctify a deity was not used to make a blessing over. So before we drink anything, we make a blessing. We don't want to bless God on a drink that was used to bless another deity. So wine became a much more complicated process, making wine. So wines, unless they're kosher certified, are deemed non-kosher. So even though the ingredients in it is basically just grape, it's still considered non-kosher because of that.
So I think you said, you made a statement, I believe, earlier before the show that grapes are actually more complex and more difficult than meat or other products.
Right. So most would think that meat and milk would be the two most complicated. I would say grape is probably a little bit more complicated than meat than milk.
Amazing. So you got into this business.
Cucumbers are super easy.
Hey, there's one thing going for a cucumber. That and a sandwich. So you got into this business from the food inspection, from kosher inspections. COVID happens. You come up with this amazing juice. And do you ever share your mash bill? Do you talk about it at all? You can say no.
Not really. But,
okay. That's all right. We don't have to talk about it. We'll just cut that right out.
All right.
So my glass is empty. Is your glass empty?
Can be.
Oh, yeah, can be.
All right. Because there's a couple more bottles here on the table that I'm interested in tasting as we continue our discussion. Kevin, while he's making a pour, do you have a favorite bourbon story that's happened to you in your life?
Well, just recently, there's so many, but and going back to my, I don't call it a collection of bourbon because I'll open anything I have. I refer to it as a selection of bourbon.
Yeah, you have an inventory of bourbon.
Nice. I like that.
But when people would go in my basement, I say, this is what happens when alimony ends. Okay, so, but
I hear you.
Like I say, just recently in Chicago, I was at a store called Benny's there. It's similar to like a Total Wine in Louisville, and they so I'm looking around. They have like the kind of hard to find rares, more expensive stuff in like a little locked room, and but I'm looking at all the stuff on the shelves, and like they have a store brand that was distilled by a very old Barton, 1792. I forget the name of the Benny's brand, but I was talking to one of the people there, and I said, well, I love 1792 Bottled and Bond is one of my favorite bourbons that I've ever had, and he said this mash bill on this one was the 1792. Evidently, the Bottled and Bond 1792 is aged 12 years, which I was not aware of that, but it's not aged as much. But anyway, so I'm looking around at multiple products, and I bought 4 bottles of that and different things. And the gentleman helping me, he could tell I was a bourbon lover, and I wasn't in there just looking for, Blanton's, Weller, the things everybody's always, I didn't ask about any of those products. And so he looked at my cart, and I hope Irina doesn't see this episode, but so he said, you're spending a little bit of money in here today. And I said, well, yeah, and he said, again, never met the gentleman in my life. And he said, I do have a Blanton's Gold in the back if you're interested.
Uh-oh.
Without hesitation, I said, yes, please. And so, but that to me is just part of the beauty of bourbon. You get that kind of connection with somebody in in the local stores, and I would imagine there's people that go in there several times a week, but again, since they're always looking for those hard to find products and not really enjoying the store brands and things like that, I think that, and again, because like Bourbon Rabbi, maybe they haven't had that yet, they may leave it on the shelf. And it's like, this is such a great product to and thank you, Brent, for, turning me on to this a couple of years ago. It's just just finding these great products, that maybe nobody's really heard of, and there's a store down in Memphis that I go to, and I shared like I took a Bourbon Rabbi down to these guys last year, and they loved it, and so again but anyway, that's my just my love of bourbon.
Perfect.
So,
yeah. It's just those experiences, like what we always keep talking about. But I'm ready to expect. What are we about to have here?
All right, so this one, number 2, this is the second product I put out. This is the Bourbon Rabbi Honey Finish. So the first one was at 115. The Honey Finish is at 100 proof. We take the barrels that we use for the 115, fill them about a third of the way with honey, and leave it there for 2 months. And every day we roll it around the distillery and clock it. So what's interesting is honey will actually kind of eat the wood, and
it's amazing.
It'll destroy it.
Amazing.
So if you leave it there, after a couple of weeks, it'll just leak out. And then you're going to add the whiskey, and the whiskey just spilled, and that's a sin. So we don't want to do that. So we clock it every day. So obviously first day, bung up with the honey sitting down at like 6 o'clock. Next day you turn it at 3, then at 7, then at 5, just every day turning it for 2 more months. We pull that honey out. We actually have a sample of that honey here. And that's this. It's kind of more of a syrup consistency. It's pulled a little bit of the whiskey, that liquid out of the barrel.
It looks like sorghum molasses.
And we're going to taste that here. Too bad you guys aren't here with us.
Chuck, you going to have that on your oatmeal?
For real.
You can have that on anything. You can have that on that. So once that comes out after 2 months of aging, we take another barrel that would have otherwise gone for the 115, put that into that barrel, let that sit for 2 more months, and then we bottle that, and that's what we're about to have now.
Oh, fantastic. All right.
And again, this is proof down to 100.
Nice nose.
Wow.
Oh,
I really haven't had very many flavored bourbons. I know the Jim Beam honey product and so forth like that. So I don't have much experience with it. I would expect to be overwhelmed with sweet honey.
It does not punch you in the face, does it?
Not the case at all.
That's really
It's just
nicely balanced.
It's like another level of complexity.
Right.
Yeah.
If you leave it for longer, leave it for 5-6 months, it'll be overbearing.
Okay.
It was a little too much at barrel strength. That's why we cut it. And some other distilleries will instead of using an actual honey, aging it and doing it this way. There are a few other distilleries that do it this way. But if you make it a chemical base,
right,
you can kind of push those flavors more.
Kind of a synthesized honey flavor.
And they become overbearing.
Yeah.
Personally, I prefer the more, natural way, and just gives it kind of a hint, like a kiss of honey at the end, and just adds to that complexity.
It's surprisingly subtle.
Very subtle and nicely balanced. I really like this. That's great.
Compared to the honey bourbons I've had, by far the best one I've ever tried.
I'll take it. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Do we want to try the honey? Can we do that? All right. So we're going to taste this honey that you brought with us, and we've got our little straws here. So is this something that you source locally? Is it
so locally
commercial
sourced
product?
honey. Just get a little dab on there. I don't want to mess up your tablecloth.
Oh, you're fine.
Dig in.
Thank you, sir.
Is honey intrinsically kosher?
Honey is actually a very, very interesting topic from a kosher standpoint. Honey is the only product that comes from a non-kosher animal that's kosher. So obviously bees produce honey. Bees are non-kosher. Insects aren't kosher. But honey is kosher. So another even more fascinating aspect of honey.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
For me, 1 second. Feel free.
So I'm gonna not double dip. I'm gonna flip it over.
Flip.
And I'm gonna go again. Holy moly, man!
This is a whole new kind of
Put
honey.
your finger on there and you get more up in
Right.
there.
There you go.
Thieve the honey.
We're thieving honey.
So in pharmacy school, we were told honey was basically the world's most perfect food. It's the only thing that lasts forever. It never goes bad. It has medicinal
What about
purposes.
Salt's got medicinal purposes and lasts forever too.
Okay.
Right? Salt was only created once.
Yeah, but maybe not a great primary food source.
Okay, fine. I'll give you that.
Supposedly, honey, the one food that if you can only subsist on one food, honey's the one that will sustain you.
Yes.
And I would recommend this one.
Oh man, that is, and you can order that on your website.
It's available on bourbonrabbi.com.
All of these products are available.
The whiskey is available at shop.bourbonrabbi.com, which is a external site because I don't have a license to sell alcohol. But the other products, the hats, some of us got.
Yeah.
We're going to get you a hat.
I'm feeling left out.
T-shirts, all that kind of stuff is available at bourbonrabbi.com.
And what a great Facebook follow. I love to follow you on Facebook. Not only do you make amazing bourbon and honey, now that I know, but you're also involved in charity work.
Yes.
I mean, you do some amazing things for the Commonwealth, and I'm sure beyond that. What is the name of your charity that you work with?
So I run a charity called Project Friendship. It's a local organization, local to Louisville, that we get donations from companies like Amazon, Walmart, Target, and get that stuff to people that need it free of charge. We were especially impactful after the tornadoes in Western Kentucky,
Right.
the floods in Eastern Kentucky.
Yes.
But aside from that, and during those times, we established permanent locations in Madisonville and Glasgow, Bowling Green, all throughout the Commonwealth on both sides, and then with the floods all through Eastern Kentucky. But we establish what we call friendship corners all throughout the state, and we stock those corners with clothing, shoes, housewares, small kitchen appliances.
How cool.
For anyone that needs it.
How cool.
Amazing.
Yeah, the bourbon industry as a whole responded big time to the tornadoes in Western Kentucky, to the floods in Eastern Kentucky, to historic natural catastrophes. So well done.
Thank you.
Well done.
I don't know if that's part of your ministry or part of the bourbon world or just part of you, but for all that you do, thank you. It's just amazing that you take the time to do that. So thank you very much.
So you're certifying distilleries and distillery products, whiskeys as being kosher. You get dubbed by the Wall Street Journal, which does wonderful feature stories. You think about them just doing financial reporting, but
Front page above the fold.
It's awesome.
Nice.
It's the
Did you get the cool picture and everything?
The picture of me was further back, but there was a picture on the front page.
Nice.
So you're engaged with the bourbon industry. Did you like bourbon at the time?
I did. I've always enjoyed bourbon. I found it to be a lot more tasteful than white spirits.
Amen.
Which is traditionally, as a Hasidic Jew, vodka was more primarily used for centuries, probably. Russia, for example, I mean, vodka was the name of the game.
Sure.
And actually, there's back then about 25% of the industry was Jewish in the 17 to 1800s in Eastern Europe. The Jews were not allowed to own land. So a lot of Jews they were recognized by the landowners and the Russian noblemen as people that were good with math, good with keeping books, that type of thing. And they were allotted inns, or called krechmas in Russia, in Eastern Europe. And the primary product to be sold at an inn was alcohol.
Yeah, sure.
So because the Jewish industry had like the corner on those inns, so Jews started making product to sell to their friends that had these inns and these taverns, and started making vodkas and all these different alcohols. But they were a quicker process. It wasn't the aged product. It wasn't these aged whiskeys in barrels. It was, and primarily, I mean, historically, vodka, clear spirit was what dominated the Eastern European, Russian market for centuries. When Jews started immigrating to America, they continued in that industry. The Shapiro brothers, for example, eventually got into that industry. About 25% of the bourbon industry at the turn of the century, from 18 to 19, was Jewish. I.W. Harper.
Okay.
I.W. was Isaac Wolf, and his last name was Bernheim. Bernheim Distillery.
Wow.
Is
Okay.
I.W. Harper.
Wow.
Harper was the name of his stableman. He didn't want to use the Bernheim name. He thought it was too Jewish. He's actually the same guy that established the Jewish hospital in Louisville that recently sold to U of L.
Okay.
It was funny. Originally, they wanted to call it Bernheim Hospital. He thought it was like, that's too Jewish. They ended up calling it Jewish Hospital.
Nice.
So,
and he's the namesake of the beautiful Bernheim Forest.
Bernheim Forest. He donated that to the state of Kentucky. Bernheim Distillery, which the Shapiro family with Heaven Hill owns today.
Yep.
Was all his. So yeah, there's all. I mean, Philip Blum owned Jim Beam for a period of time. So there's a lot of Jewish people in the industry.
Okay.
Throughout time. During the Dark Ages, I mean, during Prohibition, there were a lot of Jews involved in the bourbon trade then, when bourbon trading wasn't kosher, for lack of a better term. So actually, there was a lot of alcohol coming from Canada, from a Jewish producer there, which was Seagram's, which owned MGP originally.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot of Jews in that business. What's interesting is that the whiskey industry was a lot easier to integrate into for immigrants coming in, as opposed to the beer industry, which is really dominated by the Germans at the time.
Sure.
Right.
Then they kind of got into distribution as well. A lot of the distributors were owned by Jews, still are, a lot of them. So yeah, the industry as a whole was very, very populated by Jewish people.
Okay.
From the beginning of the country till today.
But you were liking bourbon before you had a brand.
Let's just say from when I was 21.
Yeah, we've had that conversation on this show before.
I was in Canada when I turned 18. So
there you go.
I was a bourbon fan then. There's a lot more bourbon available on the market now.
Oh yeah.
I don't want to date myself, but there's a lot of newer producers putting out a lot of good product in the last 15, 20 years.
For sure.
I grew up on KT. I know what you're talking about.
That wasn't there before. But yes, I enjoy it.
I want to ask one last question about kosher.
Doesn't have to be the last.
So you're Orthodox.
Yes.
So does the kosher certification matter only to Orthodox Jews or to the Jewish community as a whole?
So a kosher symbol is kind of been adapted as like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, kind of for a lot of people. It signifies cleanliness. It signifies an outlook that it not just does it meet the criteria set up in the Bible, but that it's done ethically. It's done in a good, way. So there are a lot of people that, aside from the kosher consumer, that look for a kosher symbol and look for those types of things for any product they consume, not just alcohol, but just in general.
By the way, my new friend, I think you dated yourself by referring to the Good Housekeeping seal of approval.
I take that line from my father. So
there you go. Exactly.
I think that rids me of the age.
So you have a third product out here. We've tried the original Bourbon Rabbi. We've tried the Bourbon Rabbi honey barrel finished, which is amazing.
2 knocked out of the park. So I want to see if you can complete the trifecta.
Let's see if we can do it. So number 3, we have here the Cabernet Sauvignon finish. This one is proved down to 98.
Okay.
Now we go back to the numerological values.
I was going to say that's an oddly specific number. So
very specific.
Please.
So when we had that first drink, we all clicked glasses and we said,
L'chaim.
L'chaim. The numerological value of the word L'chaim, which is cheers in Hebrew, is 98.
98.
So we went with a 98
Perfect.
for the Cabernet finish. Ooh, that sounded good.
That sounded
Didn't
great.
it, though?
There we go.
I hope that mic picked up that.
Yeah, let's see. Can we redo that? Oh, nailed it.
Okay, I'm saving that
I think
one.
that should be the new intro sound for Distilled Bourbon Podcast.
Look at that color, man. It's picked up some of
Yeah,
the
so if
red
you
from
look
the
at
cab,
the-
hasn't it?
If you look at the color, it's got a lot of those reds, ruby colors.
Yeah.
It's kind of dark in here to see, but I'll hold it up next to the other bottles in a second.
Thank you.
So
It's definitely a different nose than the first
yeah, I don't
two.
know if the camera can pick it up, but
Yeah, it does.
there we got
Mhm.
2 totally different colors. It's the same age, same recipe, same mash bill, same everything. 90 days in Cabernet Sauvignon barrels. This one here is the 2 months in the honey. And you want to see the difference here with the straight bourbon 2-year relative to the Cabernet finish.
Wow. That is really different, though.
Yeah, super different. I actually think that this one, which is the lowest, it's down at 98, is hotter than the 115.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It's like, what is that spice?
That's weird. I thought the honey actually at 100 was hotter than the 115.
Right. So my personal favorite is the 115. I like it that way. My father's favorite is the honey. And I need someone's favorite to be the wine.
Kevin,
Anybody wanna
he looked at you, man.
volunteer?
They gave
Is
me
that what you just said?
So go ahead.
They gave me a Kentucky hug.
It does do that. L'chaim.
By the way, I want to emphasize that 115. It's not over hot. It's not overwhelming. It is.
It's smooth, man.
Smooth.
It is
115.
The 100 definitely, the 115 definitely tastes lighter than the 100.
It's weird. It's weird.
But
Brian
they're
would
delicious.
love this one. Brian, I'm sorry you're not here because this is right down your alley, my friend.
I'm really hard pressed to say the 115 or this Cabernet finish. Which one I would rank above the other?
The 115 is pretty delicious.
Yeah.
The Cabernet though pulls in those dark fruit notes. It's got all the color and a lot of the flavor. It's
I'm not saying it's not delicious.
It's fantastic.
The 115
They're all 3 winners.
is pretty groovy.
So we've covered a lot of history today, and I appreciate that so much. It's fantastic. But what's next for the Bourbon Rabbi brand and Chaim?
I don't know. I think we need another podcast for that.
Okay.
Stick
Sounds
around.
good to me.
All right, come back next week. There's a few ideas I have, a few more products. I want to come out with a rye.
Nice.
I don't think Bourbon Rabbi stuck to bourbon come out with.
That's cool.
As long as it's a quality product.
Sure.
I'll release it. Maybe something a little lower proof, maybe a cinnamon whiskey, something like that. Kind of add to the product line, and then obviously as my barrels age, I plan to come out with some older products, some 4, some 6, some 8. As time goes on. You've
talked a little bit about aging. Is there an age that is too old, where you get a little bit of declination in quality from your point of view?
I don't want to offend anybody and say anybody's too old, but I'll do it to
Talking
barrels.
about you, Chuck.
You know how he didn't make eye contact with me when he said that?
That's because I was panning to the camera. So anyway. So yeah, I mean, at the age of a barrel, I think Kentucky is actually perfectly placed for aging barrels. I think we get really good hot summers. We get cold winters. We get snow. Not a huge abundance of it. We usually get 3, 4, 6 inches tops. Usually not more than that, but it gets really cold in the winter. It gets really hot in the summer. Days like today, you know, this spring summer season has been really weird. Actually, it's been quite cold through most of May.
Right.
This morning when I left home in Louisville, it was in the 60s. When I checked my phone earlier, it was almost 90.
Yeah.
So
30-degree swing.
Yeah.
In 8 or 10 hours.
Right. And these barrels are expanding, contracting, and that's really, there's really 2 things you're looking for in the aging of a barrel. You're looking for surface ratio. The more liquid touching the most wood, the better for the aging process. Because, as you know, 100% of the color, and some people say up to 70% of the flavor is coming from that wood. So the more wood that the liquid can touch, the better. And then the expansion and contraction, as that liquid gets sucked into the wood, and then as it contracts and pushes it back out of the wood, that circulation through the wood, you know, having that kind of like sponge effect, is pushing that flavor into the alcohol, into the distillate. So if you compare or contrast different places, a place like Denver, you know, up high on a mountain, a mile up, the barometric pressure is going to be different.
Right.
The temperature is going to be different. All those things, if you compare it to Scotland or Ireland, they're going to have throughout the year a much more median temperature throughout the year. But here in Kentucky and Louisville and even out here, it's pretty much relatively the same temperature. We're getting cold, hot, not just throughout the seasons, but throughout the days.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
And I think it does really help. So then if you take, for example, this is just a straight 2-year Kentucky bourbon, aged in Kentucky, not too far from here, where we are right now, for 2 years. Compare that to just a standard Scotch off the shelf. It's a lot darker than it, and it's only 2 years. Well, the Scotch may be 10, 12, 14 years.
Sure.
So it's getting a lot more of that in and out throughout the days, throughout the months, throughout the years. So personally, the way I've tasted throughout, if you want to do a really cool tasting of different ages, Peerless actually has a kit you can buy that's got distillate and then 6 month, 1 month, all the way up. I think
sure
it's still
do.
2 years.
Yep.
And they add to it, and you can see the difference as time goes on. It's a really, really cool thing to taste through. But I think, for the first 2 years, just every day, it's getting better and better and better. It kind of plateaus at 2. I don't think 3 years is much better than 2. I think 4 years is, and I think it continues to go up 7, 8, 9, even 10.
Yeah.
And then it kind of plateaus. The trajectory kind of tapers off. Maybe it doesn't flatline, but it kind of just, slows. That curve kind of slows. And I don't see a huge benefit in an 18 over a 12.
Sure.
I think it kind of plateaus there. And I think that's why a lot of distilleries will cold age. They'll put it in the fridge, they'll put it underground, they'll keep it cooler. They're going to stop evaporation. They're going to stop the expansion and contraction. So it's not going to add any more of those tannins anymore. It's already pulled all the good notes, the sweet notes, the things they're trying to pull out of the wood. It stops that expansion contraction process. It keeps their volume up, and then they get to charge, demand more money for an aged product.
Right.
But yeah, I don't see much of a difference between like a 12 and an 18. The super aged 30, 40-year products. I had a 45-year bourbon that literally tasted like dirt.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I mean, once it gets past 8 years for me, I don't see a lot of value for
I would
value.
agree.
You know, if you're going to pay for something that's old, I want it to taste better than what I'm a 2-year that's that fantastic. And you don't get that very often.
So you were making the point earlier about that Irish or Scottish whiskey, much milder temperatures or less dynamic temperatures. So
a lot less fluctuation.
A lot less fluctuation. It's not going to get to 6 below necessarily, as we did right before Christmas in Kentucky this past year. It's not going to get to 88 today, and it was still May. We'll see the 90s for a long time. So a lot of people out there, they see, an 18-year-old bourbon, it's got to be fantastic. I'm thinking they're coming from a Scotch perspective.
Yeah, so I think in Scotch, so there's a rule out there called the 3 to 7 rule. So 3 years in Kentucky is equivalent to 7 years in Scotland. So, a 14-year and a 6-year would be kind of equivalent. So that aging in Scotland, where it's finally getting some of those finer characters out after 10, 12, 14 years, where a 6-year-old bourbon already has those. It's already pulled those out. It's already had that expansion and contraction enough times to pull all those oils, those lipids, all those flavors out of that wood, where it takes much longer to do in a much more median temperature area. So when you're looking for an 18, 21-year-old Scotch, you're looking for a 14 or 12-year-old bourbon. At the same level.
I've loved 4-year-old bottled and bond. I've just kind of fallen into that. I love that. So this is 2-year-old whiskey. Kevin, this doesn't taste like young whiskey at all, does it?
I can't wait to taste it when it's 4 years old. That's all exciting.
I'm not going to argue with you, but this is really excellent.
And it's got to be getting pretty close to having some 4-year-old out there, I would think.
Yeah, I have some. So I decided not to make a 3-year-old label. So a lot of the product on the market now is 3. So like I said, I feel it kind of tapers, and between 2 and 4 is kind of basically the same. It doesn't really get exponentially better until it kind of hits 4, 4.5. So it's going to be the same label. Most of the bourbon on the market is actually 3. This bottle here is 3 that we tasted today. Once it hits 4, we'll have a new label for it. So consumers know.
Perfect. Fantastic.
I was just in a part of the country. I won't say where, but let's say it's a colder part of the country where it doesn't get nearly as hot. Had a flight that included some 3-year-old whiskey. My wife politely described it as bourbon flavored water. This 2-year-old Bourbon Rabbi, it's good stuff.
It is good stuff.
I like it a lot.
From the first day I've tried it, it's been fantastic. It will be in my in my bar for as long as you make it, my friend. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy for Brent. He finally got to have the Bourbon Rabbi episode because he fell in love with this product the first time he ever had a sample of it.
I tried really hard not to fanboy out on you when I met you that day at the coffee shop. I tried to play it cool, man. I put on my best Cary Grant. It didn't work very well, but
you fooled me.
You told us all about it.
I did. I came out here immediately. Well, Chaim, thank you so much. Thank you for all that you do through your charity.
For sure.
Through your spiritual life, through your mission. Now, I can't end this without talking about the tragedy that happened to your shul. You had a fire. It has impacted, I'm sure, your life in a big way. You're going to rebuild. What's happening there?
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely going to rebuild. We view the tragedy. So I'll just talk a little bit about what actually happened. April, year before this, we're now 14 months since the tragedy. It was a fire on Passover. The last night of Passover, our synagogue burnt down to the ground completely. The fire department came very quickly, put it out. It was about 4 a.m. Somehow there was some embers in a wall that didn't get put out, and 5 or 6 hours later, it reignited. And within minutes, the entire structure was on the ground, roof caved in, completely decimated. Thank God we were able to save some of the scrolls, some of the books, a few of the artifacts in between. When we thought there was no danger, the fire department allowed us in. We took some of those stuff out to use for service on Passover that we did at another location. And then during that service, which was only a half a block away, we watched the smoke billow up a few hours later, and the building collapse. We're rebuilding. We actually just announced about 10 days ago our plan for rebuilding. It's not just going to be a synagogue; it'll be a museum, a full cultural center where people from all faiths can come and experience not just Judaism, but the things that Judaism has affected on the world, how different things within the religion affect other things, and how cultures can all meld together. It'll be the Jewish Museum. There'll be a kosher kitchen there. There's no kosher restaurant in the state of Kentucky right now.
Is that right?
We're going to change that. So yeah, all those things are coming. We're finalizing on a location now. We have a general schematic of what the building is going to look like, and that building campaign is.
So you're going to have a capital campaign?
Yes, absolutely. We're going to start a capital campaign in a few weeks, a few months from now. We're trying to finalize on a location before that. Donations can be made at chabadky.com/donate, which is chabadky.com/donate. So
Distilled Bourbon Podcast will definitely have a link for you. And your friends here in Kentucky or your friends here in Henderson will help in any way that we can. And we're excited to see where you go from here. What a fantastic journey you've been on, and
how cool!
And it's nice that we can experience part of that.
Awesome, I appreciate it. Actually, the new facility is going to have a bourbon exhibit in it, talking about Jews in the industry from the beginning through today. There's a lot there, and it's going to be a great exhibit and a great add to the bourbon industry.
So celebrate the Jewish heritage of bourbon.
Absolutely,
that is so awesome. That's so cool.
Well, very cool. We can't wait to experience it. Kevin, my friend, thank you for being here. I'm glad that you actually got behind the microphone, and thank you, Irina, for whatever you did to make him do that. And we miss you. I'm sorry you couldn't be here today. Chuck, anything else from your side of the table?
I never get to say goodbye to everybody, but goodbye, everybody, and drink responsibly.
Please, l'chaim responsibly.
L'chaim responsibly.
Shalom.
L'chaim.